The German boy received his uniform for the first time, but someone else's name was written on the collar, so Paul returned the uniform. It was probably too small for the fellow. The quartermaster removed the name tag. Paul dismissed his doubts, but what he did not see, there were more name tags under the table. These uniforms had been worn by other soldiers just days before. After the soldiers were killed, their uniforms and boots were stripped off and packed up to be sent to the rear. Then female workers washed off the blood. Taylor repaired the fabric and cut off the labels on the clothes. But because there were too many uniforms, the labels were often forgotten. These new uniforms were then handed to these newly graduated German boys. Paul was extremely excited. He immediately changed into the uniform. The recruits stepped onto the battlefield excitedly, but soon their smiles disappeared. French shells struck the unit. Paul hurriedly put on his gas mask. The recruits had just arrived at the trench and were forced to use helmets to clear the water. That night, Paul was assigned to stand guard, but with the rise of a flare, the enemy launched a fierce bombardment. Paul quickly hid in a dugout. He trembled violently and regretted his decision to enlist. The next day, Paul survived by luck. The trench was filled with corpses. He began collecting the dog tags of the dead soldiers. He finally understood where his uniform had come from. 3 years later, Paul had become a veteran. Facing enemy artillery, he no longer felt fear, skillfully avoided French bullets. German soldiers soon stormed into the enemy trench. Paul even found the enemy headquarters freely enjoyed French food. The table suddenly began to shake violently. Even the rats fled in panic. Paul sensed something was wrong, so snorts. He immediately went outside to check. A massive iron box was moving toward them. Paul was stunned. Bullets could not stop the tank from advancing. The tank launched a fierce attack on the Germans. Paul could only tremble in the trench, but the massive tank mercilessly crushed their trench. The German soldiers completely collapsed and began to retreat. Faced with such a crushing defeat, the German government finally signed an armistice. Paul thought he could finally go home, but for the sake of own honor, the officer ordered an attack before the ceasefire. Paul had already become numb. At that moment, he had lost his soul, charged at the enemy like a zombie. In the end, Paul never returned to Germany. His label, just like 3 years earlier, was taken away by a new recruit.